Okay.
All right, I think we are live.
We are live indeed. Hello, George.
Hello, Marta. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you feeling?
Pretty good, pretty good. All things considered. It's been a busy, busy time, but it's great to be able to do this webinar today because this is one I think a lot of people will be interested in, and that's all about live streaming tips for pro productions. And I think that's something we've seen a huge increase in during these pandemic times. Certainly from a business perspective we have, but people's desire to learn about this stuff has really accelerated as well, which is really exciting.
Absolutely. And we love to see everyone who's joined us. We see you in chat. We see you coming in from Mexico, from New Jersey, Indianapolis, Copenhagen, Norway. Thank you all so much. A bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you guys have a question, we have a Ask a Question section below the video. So just post your questions there and we'll try to get to them at the end or maybe throughout. We also have polls for you. We're going to have polls for you kind of throughout the webinar, and we would love for you to weigh in. And yeah, just feel to chat at us in the chat window. We'll try to address as many questions as we can. George, I think you actually wanted to address this first question right off the bat.
I did, yeah. I saw that there was already a question in the Q&A, which is awesome to see. Thank you so much. And I noticed that people had used the little upvote tool, which is another great part of that Q&A panel. You can upvote things that other people have asked if you need the same question answered or you think it's important. That one was specifically asking if this would be rebroadcast. All of our webinars are posted after they're finished, both to our website, epiphan.com/webinars, but also to our YouTube channel after they're finished. So we do them live here on Crowdcast, but all of them are available on YouTube after they're finished. So if you want to go check out the back catalog, or you have to leave early today, or schedule conflicts or whatever, you can always find that stuff later on. That's not a problem. So not that we rebroadcast them per se, but they're available as VOD on YouTube and of course on our website. So
That's right.
if you need to check that out later.
That's right. And I'm actually going to go ahead and post the links to the webinars on YouTube and on our page to chat right now. I'm actually going to choose the right playlist. Instead of sending you to the general page, I'll actually choose the right playlist for you guys.
That is fancy. All right. I also noticed that our first poll should be up, and that's asking the question, what sector are you part of? And this is just a curiosity thing because we've seen so many different businesses and different market verticals getting interested in live streaming. And this really helps us to understand, where you guys are coming from and who's using this stuff, which can help us target not only future content, but also our products. So we really appreciate you weighing in on that poll. Don't answer it in chat. Open the poll panel and weigh in there. There's a few different categories there.
That's right.
All right. I think that's the housekeeping and sweeping done. So today's topic, live streaming tips for pro productions. This is kind of a big one to unpack, so we're going to break this down into a few sections. But the main thing to think of is that live streaming is an extremely powerful way to promote products, services, brand recognition, engage with your audience, your customers, engage maybe just internally with employees, especially with so many people working from home. So I don't think there's any businesses that should overlook the power of live streaming. But of course, live has its own risks. It's live media is challenging. So we want to kind of help it with that a little bit if we can. One of the biggest risks, of course, is you don't get to do it over. So if Marta or I screw up right now, we don't get to do it over.
That's right.
So let's hope we don't do that too badly, at least today.
Well, this comes with the territory, as George said, and with practice, it gets a lot easier, a lot better. I remember being really nervous during my first live streams, but now it's just like I'm talking to you guys. That's all that's happening.
Yeah, it definitely gets easier the more time goes on, for sure. I've gotten to the point where I don't even really think about it anymore. It's just another day.
Right.
So we'll share with you some of the tips that we have found, hopefully and help you ensure that your productions go off with without a hitch. And we're definitely going to be focused on the tech side of things. There's a lot that goes into these overall, but the technology is kind of the cornerstone. You know, you still have to choose the right talent to put on your live streams, but that's sort of a whole other area compared to the tech side. So we're going to target mostly the tech side.
Exactly, George. Yes, don't forget, we're trying to say that don't forget about the planning stage and, you know, the promotion stuff, but we're going to try to help you with those tech tips right now.
Exactly. So the agenda for today, we're going to break this down into basically 5 parts. We're going to do the first part, doing a live streaming overview. Essentially, what is live streaming and what are the key components we need to look at? The second one will be professional live streaming gear. You know, what should we be looking at to make sure that the equipment we're using is going to give us, you know, the best quality. We may not necessarily want webcams and built-in microphones. We probably want something a little more professional, so we'll talk about that. The third, as we were kind of touching on, pre-show preparation. That can be a big challenge sometimes, but is also maybe one of the biggest payoffs in terms of making sure there aren't any mistakes. So making sure your producers have everything prepped. Our producer today, Adam, has been working hard for quite a bit this afternoon before we have gone live, and Marta and I as well. So we'll kind of share with you some of the things we see there. Then best practices, this kind of ties into the other one as well. You know, what are some of the things that you can do, and that we'll share some of the things we do to make sure that your productions are successful. And then last but not least, we will focus on your questions. Feel free to ask them throughout, but the bulk of them we will probably answer in the 5th part.
That's right. And don't be afraid to ask questions. There are no stupid questions. So just, anything will help you out. We're here for you.
Exactly. No stupid questions, only stupid answers.
We'll give you the right answers. Don't worry. We have the teacher gave us the answers.
Well, maybe you will. I can't speak for myself.
All right. Okay, I'll speak for myself.
So, live streaming overview. So, a lot of people are unfamiliar with, or are just learning to get familiar with the concept of live streaming. And as we've talked about in previous webinars and even on our weekly live show, Live at Epiphan, that we do on Thursdays, there sometimes can be some confusion when we're talking about live streaming versus something like conferencing. These are not the same things. They do different things. They're geared for different kind of ideas and uses. So today we're talking about live streaming in the purest sense. So that's kind of broken down into several components. So this usually involves video sources, audio sources, some sort of video encoder, whether that's hardware or software, a streaming destination, a CDN, a content delivery network, streaming server, platform, that kind of thing. And then, of course, probably most importantly, a decent internet connection. It's pretty difficult to do anything live without that.
That's right. So let's have a look at a diagram. That's actually the next slide that we have to kind of put it all together. So you have, as you, George, mentioned, your video sources, your video cameras. We're not going to be touching on cell phones, smartphones as a video source. So we're talking about more professional cameras. For your audio sources, could be a microphone. You could also use a mixer. We'll get a little bit into that as well. You can also use your computer, your slide share as a video source as well. That counts. And then you have your video encoder. In this case, we have the Epiphan Pearl Mini as the encoder that's going to be taking your video and audio signal and then converting it into a digital format and then sending it to a streaming destination, such as YouTube or Vimeo or Wowza or Facebook or anything else that accepts a live stream.
Exactly.
Now, the video encoder doesn't have to be hardware as it is here. It could be software. But we'll address that a little bit later as well.
Yeah, so I mean, this is kind of the typical thing, and you know, we're showing our Pearl Mini here as an example, and it's showing even up to 3 video inputs, which is pretty common on the Pearl Mini. And so we just put up a poll as well asking the question, how many video inputs would you expect to use or need in your live production? Because that can help you decide in terms of what you should be using as an encoder. Software, hardware, and which hardware, and so on. Many times the decision making process for that is how many video inputs do you need? How many cameras, video sources from computers or other equipment? So that's something to keep in mind, and please weigh in on that poll. So professional streaming gear comes in many different forms, but definitely you would probably want to start focusing on cameras. And this is really, again, going beyond the webcams. You know, webcams are great, they're convenient, they're often built into the laptops you might already be using, but they're only great to a point. They're not good at adapting to larger spaces. They're not good at complex lighting adjustments. And some are just plain garbage. So not all webcams are created equal, and they do have some limitations. If you're going into things like conferencing applications and you don't really care about video quality, that's where webcams are really designed and aimed for. But when we're talking about professional live streaming and professional production, then we need something a little different. We need something, professional. So we're looking at larger cameras, things with larger sensors, maybe interchangeable lenses and manual adjustments for things like aperture and ISO and all these other things, so that we can get the most out of our image quality before we even get to the live streaming portion.
Now, are there any special considerations, George, for when you're picking out a camera for live streaming?
Yeah, so I mean, it really does depend on the space, the lighting, maybe the operators on what they can do. So some of the examples we have here, mirrorless cameras, we have pictured here a Panasonic G7, which is a camera I happen to own personally. I'm not using it today, but I do have one, as well as things like a C100 and some other Handycam style things, and then of course a PTZ camera. All of these would maybe suit different needs. The PTZ cameras are great for larger spaces where you might have to make adjustments, but it has to be hard mounted permanently. So maybe mounted to a ceiling or a wall, but you need to make some adjustment. Maybe you just don't have the floor space to put a tripod. Whereas if you do use a tripod, then you might find things like the camcorder or the cinema cameras are going to be more flexible, especially if they have interchangeable lenses like a cinema camera. Then maybe at the more entry level, the things like the mirrorless cameras, especially ones that have interchangeable lenses, might be the best place to start.
But I think there's also a consideration when it comes to mirrorless and DSLR cameras that they have to have a clean HDMI out. Well, that's for all cameras. They have to have a clean HDMI out, which means there has to be an option where you don't see all the UI elements, because they're going to get streamed as well, the UI elements of the camera.
Right.
Additionally, the camera has to be able to not shut off, because a lot of these cameras have auto shut off after 20 or 30 minutes. And one way to fix that is to have constant power. So to use something called a dummy battery, or just plug it into AC directly. So those are two things that you should be looking for: clean HDMI and the ability to have constant power to the camera.
Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of variables to all of those in selecting a camera. And it's one of the reasons why it's difficult to give specific makes and models all the time, because there's so many variables. But when you're looking at things like clean HDMI and running nonstop, that's pretty much a given with a PTZ camera. That's kind of what they're the best at. But they're limited usually in their adjustments, although they usually have really good zoom, especially optical zoom. They're limited in some of the other adjustments like aperture and stuff like that. So they're not quite as good at like close-up shots. A Handycam style, camcorder style, they're also great for running all the time. Older ones, however, often don't have clean HDMI out, or maybe only HDMI out on playback of recordings. Newer cameras, that's less of an issue, but again, something to keep in mind. The cinema cameras, usually no issue with any of those things, but they're very expensive. So there's trade-offs. And then again, the mirrorless style, many of the newer mirrorless cameras will give you a live, clean HDMI out. They are very flexible if they have interchangeable lenses. They shoot like a DSLR, so you have all the different camera adjustments. So they can be good for both close and medium range, or if you put the right lens, maybe really long range. However, many of them need dummy batteries to run all the time. Like pictured here, the G7 needs a dummy battery to run all the time. The camera I'm actually using for this is the Sony a5100 needs a dummy battery to run all the time. So again, all these different things to keep in mind. I don't think you can actually go wrong with any of these options, provided it checks all those boxes, or you at least understand how to make it check all those boxes.
And if you guys want to learn more, we have a blog available about that. I've posted a link in chat. So check that out if you want to know more. And for now, how about we move on to audio, because that's another very important part of live streaming.
Yeah, and I did just want to touch on one thing. We have started to see more cameras in the mirrorless and DSLR space that are starting to allow you to install software that allow you to use it as a webcam.
That's right.
So if you're going with the software route of live streaming, that could be beneficial. And so we'll come back to that a little bit more later. But that's another feature if you're going and shopping for a camera right now, today, you don't currently own one. That might be something to consider and put on your shopping list as a spec you want to support. So
good point, George. But we'll touch on that when we talk about capture cards.
Exactly.
Foreshadowing. All right, audio.
Audio is a big one. Audio is where people sometimes start to really get nerdy and upset or picky or all kinds of things. Generally speaking, and I think we've probably said this 1,000 times, slightly lackluster video can be forgivable. Bad audio is rarely, if never, forgivable. People will deal with slightly off video, but if audio is really bad, it not only ruins the content, it's super distracting, it brings everything down. So making sure that you have really high quality audio and understanding the audio gear and the environment you're using it in can be very, very important.
And we have here for you just a selection of different microphones that you could use depending on your situation. For example, I am using a kind of like a desktop mic right now. It's on an arm, and I guess this is this would be a shotgun mic. I'm not
usually
sure.
That one's probably considered a cardioid, actually.
Cardioid.
You have,
yeah.
Mine, the one I have, which I'm not using, I'm actually using a lav mic for the audio you guys are hearing in Crowdcast, but I have a different microphone that I often use, which is either cardioid or an omnidirectional. There's a switch on it. So there's a lot of these things, and to look at which ones you need, I would say personally one of the great ways and easy ways to start is with actually lav mics, lavalier microphones, whether they're wired or wireless. Depending on your physical space, wireless obviously gives you a lot more freedom. So if you're trying to shoot someone on stage and they're going to be walking around and moving, a wireless lav mic is a fantastic way to go. A wired lav mic, if they're sitting in a static position and you want to have a really clean shot of them, again, you guys probably can't even see or barely see the lav mic that I'm wearing. And that's one of the big advantages of using those. You could go with the boom style, headset style stuff. They're good, but they can sometimes be distracting visually, and they're harder to get just right. Sometimes one person's wearing it and it's maybe rubbing on their beard, for example, when they talk, or it's so close to their mouth they're basically choking on it. These are bad things, and those are things that a lav can help avoid.
Yeah.
Of course, there's desktops and handheld mics that are usually in that omni and cardioid and hypercardioid kind of design. And then the shotgun mic. So the shotguns are, in a way, just like this diagram shows, kind of like the zoom lens on a camera, except for audio. It's a very narrow focused pattern designed for distance as opposed to being right up on top of it. So the choice here is going to depend on your space. My personal opinion is lav mics or things like cardioid mics on arms in front of you, like we often use.
Yes. Now, how would you bring the signal in, George? How would you bring it into your live stream, though?
Yeah, so I mean, with all of these, you're going to see different options. One of the things we have pictured here is a Blue Yeti, very popular microphone in the vlogger, YouTuber kind of space, because it's a USB microphone. Although it's a cardioid mic, which means it delivers very good quality. It's USB, so you can plug it directly into a computer. You don't need any other audio gear. Whereas when you start looking at some of these others, you know, shotguns or some of the dynamic cardioids or condenser mics, these things might need preamps and mixers and things like that in order to drive them. And then you have to get that into your whatever system you're using. Wired lavs will have some sort of a base station that often can plug directly into many different things. Sometimes just with like a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack style microphone input, or some of them are USB. So usually the you know, omnidirectional boom style mics have receivers similar to a lav mic, so they're pretty similar in that regard.
So one of
so
the...
just
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, so I mean, it's just knowing which one you want to use and then following that chain, I suppose.
One of the easiest way to bring in audio is through your camera. So many cameras, if it's a higher end camera, you have those professional inputs like XLR.
Yeah.
But many cameras also have the 3.5 millimeter jack. So you can just, if it's a receiver and a microphone pair, you just plug your receiver into your camera and boom, you're ready to go. Your audio is going to be coming in through the video feed, with the video feed.
Exactly.
So just be mindful of that, of the connector type, to make sure that everything works together. So you have a way to connect your audio either to your camera or to your hardware encoder or software encoder or whatever you're using. Just be mindful of that.
I think the upside of analog audio, so not necessarily going with a USB microphone, but with analog audio, is it's pretty easy with the right equipment to adapt from things like XLR to TRS to 3.5 mil and all these other things. I mean, there's a lot to keep in mind there, but analog audio, there's pieces you can get to adapt and change it a little bit better. Where something like USB, it's only ever going to be USB. It has to be hosted by a computer of some kind to become complete. So they're great if you only ever use it connected to that computer or hardware and it never really moves, but it's maybe the least flexible in changing scenarios. So, you know, if you need to run audio a long distance, analog audio is going to be better. You can't run USB very far. So, you know, if you need to run it across an auditorium, an analog system is going to be your better choice, I would say. Especially
Great.
wireless.
Yeah.
So, what about bringing in other signal types and even, you know, I guess things that don't output over directly USB like a webcam does. You want to use a professional camera, but you need it on your computer. That's where capture cards come into play. So these are pretty straightforward. Our own AVIO series of capture cards. There's many others on the market as well. But typically they will have HDMI, DVI, VGA, SDI, a variety of different inputs on them. HDMI being the most common. And basically most of them work like a webcam does, with the exception that instead of having, you know, kind of the crummy sensor and bad glass and lens and no adjustments that a webcam has, you can take the high quality professional video from your good camera and make it behave as though it's a webcam by way of a capture card. So this really opens up your flexibility, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be a camera at that point. You could bring in other video signals as well, as long as they're outputting something like HDMI. So that could be another computer, or a video mixer switcher, or a specialized piece of equipment that you might need to share. There's a lot of value and a lot of flexibility in using a capture card that using a directly connected USB camera like a webcam, or even some of the DSLRs that are offering USB connections now, are not going to offer you. So it is an extra expense in some cases, but it's probably worth it to gain the flexibility.
So it's pretty straightforward, right? You have a device in the middle, you have USB coming out of one end going into your computer, and then HDMI or DVI or VGA going into whatever you're trying to capture your video from. Very easy to use.
These typically will also capture audio over HDMI and SDI. So if you're running audio through your camera, this becomes your single interface to bring it into your computer. However, depending on what you're doing, you may also need a separate audio interface to bring that into your computer as well. And there's a number of ways you can do that. There's USB-based ones that are not necessarily only microphones. Things like the Focusrite, Scarlett products are pretty good, reasonable options. There's a lot in that category, but Focusrite is one of the more well-known ones and tends to be fairly inexpensive for what they do. But it'll allow you to use an XLR mic or a 1/4-inch TRS audio feed, convert it to USB, and bring it into your computer. It's the audio version of what a video capture card does, essentially. But it gives you some preamp. They often include things for like phantom power for microphones, and you can adjust gain. Some higher end ones will have full EQ settings. So they can be, again, extremely flexible. If you have a lot of microphones, you might want to look at a full-on mixer. Some of these have USB on them. The larger you get, that tends to become less common, and you need to then have maybe layers to it, depending on, again, the equipment that you're using. But definitely if you have multiple microphones for multiple different speakers and people participating, a mixer becomes really important so that you can adjust the EQ of the individual participants. You can adjust the gain, you can fade them as things change. And that often happens with handheld mics, for example. Someone pulls it farther away from their face or pulls it closer. You might have to manually adjust the fade. So, mixers can be really great in terms of making dynamic adjustments for a variety of scenarios.
Absolutely. We found in our work, whenever we do a live stream, there's always a decision. Do we use the mixer? Do we not? We always end up using the mixer because it just provides so much control, and it becomes very easy to control your audio.
Exactly. And again, when you're talking about audio being so important, you want to make sure that you have the tools to accomplish that.
Okay, so we have our video, we have our audio. George, how do we capture all of that, and how do we stream it out to the internet?
So this starts to filter down into two kind of different areas. Hardware encoders versus software encoders. And there are definitely pros and cons to both. On the hardware encoder side, which, yes, we have a slightly biased opinion here, as that is the business of Epiphan. But, the advantages there is you typically are dealing with something that is designed specifically for what it's doing, involves less moving pieces, and so can offer you higher reliability with fewer points of failure. And when you're talking about professional production, that can be pretty important. Usually it means that if you need support for something, it's a single contact point instead of, I need to call this camera guy, and then I need to call the capture card guy, and then I need to call the other guy who, vMix, because we installed that software on my Dell laptop and I got to call them. That can be a lot of issues if you're trying to narrow down where something is a problem. Oftentimes the hardware encoders, because they're dedicated to their tasks, will have more flexibility. And there's some caveats to that, but they often will, as long as you're selecting the right model for your needs. They often can be easier to use because, again, they have a very focused user interface. So they can streamline certain aspects of it instead of overcomplicating things you may not actually need or want. And they can be very simple to set up in that same sort of thing.
Right now, I'm actually using a Pearl Mini. We can explain to you guys how exactly we're doing this stream later, because everyone has that question at the end. We're not using Zoom. But I just want to point out that it's super easy to set up. literally just plug in your sources directly because you don't need a capture card. I can just plug in my camera, plug in this XLR mic directly, and I'm ready to go. It is
Yeah,
so easy.
exactly. I'm using a Pearl Mini as well. I'm using a USB lav mic on mine instead of an XLR mic, but Pearl can do that. I have the flexibility, and then I have my camera plugged directly into it as well. That gives me a lot of power. If we look at the software encoder side, there are some great advantages here. Typically, they represent a lower upfront investment, especially if you're looking at software like OBS, which is free. They're more readily available because they're obviously software, so there's no stock to buy. They run on standard computer hardware, Windows, Mac, even Linux in some cases. But I would say that also plays into the con side. Something like OBS is free, but the trade-off is if you have a problem with OBS, there's no company to call. You have to rely on community forums and hope someone responds. You look at something like vMix or Wirecast, yeah, they're software, they're paid software, and oftentimes you're approaching the $400, $500, $600, $900 range in price for just the software, depending on what level you need. So you add that on top of the computer hardware, which luckily you may already own a decent enough computer to run this software, and if you do, that's awesome, and that's where the lower upfront investment comes from. However, if you have to spec a computer on top of that because you don't have one that's suitable, you find yourself approaching the cost of hardware encoders pretty quickly, and ultimately maybe missing out on some of the other flexibility pieces that hardware offers. So nothing against software. They can be fantastic to especially initially get up and running, but they usually are not an all-in-one solution. You need capture cards, you need a decent computer, and you need to know how to use that software, which in some cases can be pretty complex, especially with things like vMix. vMix is awesome software, but man, it can do so much that just trying to dig through and make your head spin.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly. Okay, George, so we have covered the professional live streaming gear.
yeah,
We know all about cameras. We talked about audio a little bit, and we know how to bring it into a encoder, a hardware encoder or software encoder. And now we have to understand what are the tips? What are the
yeah.
best practices for moving forward?
Yeah, so we know our space that we're going to shoot. We've selected a camera that's appropriate to it. We've selected audio that's appropriate to it. We've decided on whether or not we're equipping a hardware code or using software. So we're ready to go. We're ready to just go live, right? I mean, that's all there
Yeah,
is to it.
just
That's all I need.
press the button, that big red
Press
button,
go.
live.
Exactly. You press go and you go. Yeah, not quite.
Not quite. In reality, it's a bit more complex than that.
Exactly, and that's where the pre-show preparation really comes into play. So using reliable gear, and again, whether that's hardware or software, making sure it's reliable, because the last thing you want is when you walk in there and you want to go live and you go to press that go live button and Windows blue screens and everything crashes. That's a bad thing. So you want to make sure that whatever it is that you're using is reliable. So whether that's a hardware encoder or a computer running software, I would say you probably want it to be dedicated to that task and not shared for other tasks, because that opens up a reliability risk when people are doing who knows what on it.
Mm-hmm.
And the fewer points of failure is going to be the best path forward. So for us, from our product line, we have hardware encoders like the Pearl Mini and the Pearl 2. But we also have capture cards like our AVIO series, and we've tried to design those to be bulletproof as much as they can be so that you can plug it in and go and not have to worry too much about anything.
Yeah. And something that really sets apart professional productions is that they test every single piece of their gear, and they can swear by it and they know exactly how it works and that it's reliable, and that during mission critical situations, it's not going to fail them.
Exactly, and not just testing once, but testing repeatedly to make sure that everything is going.
Yeah.
So we've got some reliable gear to connect all our stuff to. We're still not quite ready to go live. We've gone through all the capture cards, the hardware encoders. We've chosen that to streamline our process, but there is other elements to all of this as well. And sometimes, no matter how good your camera is, that's only one part of it. You might also need to look at lighting. The best camera in the world shooting in a dark closet is still not going to look good. So we need to look at how we're lighting our subject, whether that's a person or a physical item. We've talked about this in other webinars and live shows. The most common one to look at is the 3-point lighting scheme. It's very, very basic as this diagram sets up, but that will vary depending on your space. I have a rough 3-point lighting kind of setup where I'm sitting in my home office. It is actually 3 lights. They're not laid out in quite this traditional setup, partially because I use a green screen, so I have to modify it ever so slightly in terms of my backlight positioning. But in general, you want to make sure that whatever you're shooting is well lit, but not ugly. You don't want shadows everywhere. And so paying attention to the lighting is really critical.
And that's why we're suggesting the 3-point lighting system, because the first light, the key light, kind of provides the maximum amount of light. It's coming in at like a 45-degree angle from the front, but that causes a lot of shadows on the other side. And this is when the fill light comes in, just positioned just a bit further away than the key light, and it eliminates those harsh shadows. And the backlight provides that nice rim of light kind of around your contour, making you pop from the background.
And can also help remove any other shadows that might appear as well.
Exactly.
So we have a couple examples here of setups you might use. The photo on the left is from a production from a long time ago, pre-pandemic. Some people had made comments about that when we used this photo in a previous webinar. This was a shot pre-pandemic, so no one was violating social distancing, where in that space we were using that 3-point lighting kind of setup in a very large space. So it can be that simple. If you want a lot more complexity, the photo on the right is from a customer of ours, and they use a studio setup with quite a bit more than 3 points of light, but they have a lot of complexity to the backdrop that they're trying to highlight, and highlight everything that's happening to the on-camera talent and products that they're demonstrating. So they have a lot of lighting in an overhead rig. That's definitely the fancier full-on studio way to go. You don't have to do that, but if you have the ability to do it, it's only going to make your production that much better if you have the ability to invest at that level.
Exactly.
Of course, the other thing to consider is that if you are going into things like green screen and chroma keys, lighting becomes even more important. And it's not easy to do. You can't have shadows. You have to have even lighting on whatever the color you're keying out is. So that can become more complex as well. And having people that are experienced in doing that is very valuable. I know when I've been trying to set up my green screen here at home, there are times where I'm like, oh man, I wish I just had Adam Palmer just to come here and do this for me, because he understands that lighting on a green screen in ways that I don't think I'll ever understand. So it does take a little bit of talent when you go to the green screen level as well.
Exactly. Now, of course, something else to keep in mind is your internet, is your bandwidth.
Yeah.
George, I know you love to talk about this.
Yeah, I mean, this becomes one of those things. It's the backbone, right? If you're going live, you're doing live streaming, it doesn't matter what other things you select in front of it. You're only as strong as your weakest link. And in my experience, one of the areas that most people are not that conscious of is their internet connection and how weak it actually is. Depending on where you live, you may or may not have access to great internet. And even if you do, you may have selected the cheaper package just due to cost, and then you may find that it's not suitable. The biggest thing to keep in mind here is that your download speed doesn't matter. It's your upload speed that matters. And that's a number that is not often advertised when you're selecting an internet package. So, and I would also say that many times, even if you are paying for a certain amount, you may not actually be getting that speed. So testing it becomes critically important. And not just testing it once, but repeatedly testing your upload speed to find out what your average is, because bandwidth always varies. It's always going up and down in waves. So we need to know kind of where our average is, and even the lowest, so that we can fit within that. General guidelines here: if we want to do a full HD stream, 1080p, at fairly common settings, you probably want a minimum of 8 megabit or more upload speed. That's your starting point. If you can't achieve that, and you're only getting something like 5, then realistically, you're only going to stream in something like 720 instead of 1080, and so on and so on. And for many people we've encountered, recently, especially many of our customers in the house of worship space, the churches, who are fairly new to the live streaming market and they're trying to get up and running, they were only, currently subscribed to very, very basic internet packages. And the number of people I've encountered in that market, that their upload speeds are less than 1 megabit in many cases.
Oof.
You can't live stream on that. I'm sorry. Hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you can't. It's just not enough in order to deliver any sort of quality content. So we need to know these numbers. There's lots of ways of testing it. You could literally do a Google search for speed test, and Google has its own tool, or speedtest.net will come up, or FAST, which is Netflix's speed test tool, will come up. Your internet provider may have their own speed test tool. I would actually recommend using multiple of those as your repeated tests to try and get an average, because each of those services may ping off of different servers to do the test, and you may get different results. So these are things to look at and consider.
Right, and we're talking about, someone mentioned in chat, Joseph, thank you, that we are talking about upload speed, as you mentioned,
Absolutely.
George. And for the slide, the 5 and the 8, we are talking about upload speed.
Absolutely, exactly. And even this isn't referencing the bit rates you could set for your streams. This is just the minimum amount of upload speed you would want at either 1080 or 720 respectively. If you're getting, here at my house, my internet's not the best, it's okay. My upload speed is 15, 16 megabit. So, I can do a 1080 stream at 10 megabit if I want and be okay. I usually don't, but I could. Just give people an idea.
Yeah, so definitely keep that in mind.
Our rule of thumb is the other way to look at it is look at the encoding settings and bit rate that you want to stream in first, multiply that by 1.5 or ideally by 2, and that's your minimum upload speed. So here's one of the ways we come to this number is 1080p 30 frames per second on YouTube. An average setting that YouTube recommends and is pretty typical is 5 megabit for your bit rate. Multiply that by 1.5 or by 2, there's your minimum upload speed. So just to give you the idea of where we come to this 8+ number.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, in addition to testing your bandwidth, you need to do a tech rehearsal as well.
You got to test your talent.
Test your talent, yeah. And you have to do this in advance, of course, a few days before, to ensure that everyone has the right equipment. If you're bringing in remote guests, you got to make sure they have the right camera, the right audio. Someone in chat mentioned earlier that Zoom audio sucks, and it does suck indeed.
Does.
And someone also pointed out it's bad because people don't always have the right equipment. If it's
that's actually most likely the case.
Exactly. So if you're using an internal computer microphone, yes, you're probably going to get crummy sound. But as we mentioned before, you can always bring in that sound through a USB microphone or through an audio interface.
Exactly. I could probably rant about bad microphones in Zoom for hours. AirPods are suck. The inline mics on most earbuds are not great. The built-in microphones on laptops are awful. Those are always your weakest link there. Again,
Some companies go as far as to ship their remote participants the right equipment. So if you're an event company and you're organizing a virtual conference, you would actually ship the right equipment with all the instructions and have your remote participants set it up at home.
but that's also where the rehearsal comes in, is even if you are using Zoom for any of this stuff, you recognize you're not going to get perfect audio, but you want it to be the best it can be. The rehearsal is important there because your remote guest comes in, you get on a call together, you find out he's using the built-in microphone on a laptop and he joined in the web browser instead of in the Zoom application, so there is no echo cancellation, and it's a complete disaster. Well, you can tell that person in rehearsal, you need to go get a set of earbuds and a real microphone and for the actual show, and hopefully they do so. Otherwise, it's a complete mess.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you can do that, then your rehearsal, the different things, look at the camera positioning, look at the lighting, make sure that everything is okay, make sure that your talent knows the flow of the show. We talked about this in our own rehearsal. I don't like to rehearse scripts. I'm definitely a much more ad lib, off the cuff kind of guy. Because I'll end up saying something really, really good and then forget to say it on the actual show. So I work on just bullet points. That's just how I do it. But the tech side has to be rehearsed. We have to double check all of that is working. And sometimes even the rehearsal lets you down, but it's better to find out up front and check it all out.
That's right. That's right. So the next thing we want to mention is how to take your setup to like the next level, the pro level. So having one of everything is great, but having two of everything is even better. So this is
twice as good.
It's twice as good. This is something called streaming redundancy, and there are various ways of backing up various systems, the various points of failure, to make sure that if one thing goes out, it automatically fails over to another unit or another system.
Exactly. Now, this is definitely not the low-cost solution, but we're here today talking about the professional solution. So if you consider yourself to be at that very high-level professional for doing this kind of thing, redundancy should probably be part of your setup. We have customers who do literally exactly this setup as shown here, where they, in some cases, they might even duplicate the cameras as well. That's less common, but having your production feed running into two separate physical encoders, that could be hardware or software, but either way, two separate encoders. Ideally, those two encoders are connected to two different networks. In a perfect world, even two different internet connections. And then one is configured with your primary stream, and most CDNs support this. Facebook and YouTube support it for sure. They have a primary ingestion server and a backup ingestion server. So your primary encoder is going to the primary ingestion server, your backup's going to the backup. If either your encoder fails or the network fails on your primary, then the secondary will automatically fail over to that. So that's important. I have encountered people that have tried to do some level of redundancy on a single hardware device. That's not real redundancy, partially because, again, you have to think about the weakest links. And when we're talking about live streaming, internet outages and network problems are by far the most common weakest link. The chances of the primary ingestion server of YouTube going down is slim to none. But the chances of your internet suffering severe outages or bandwidth problems is pretty good, actually. If you selected a good encoder, the chances of that going down are fairly low, but there's always a possibility. And again, if you're using software and computers, then that risk increases as well. So making sure that you have the right gear set up, duplicated in as many places as you can, especially with networking and internet connections, if possible, is ultimately going to give you the redundancy built in.
That's right. And we have a star customer that we always like to talk about, Mike Salas from Savvy Pro. And he is a champion of this setup. He's been using this for years now. And I'm actually including a link in our chat to a live show episode that we did about streaming redundancy. So if you want to learn about all those ways you can back up your system, you can check that out.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you consider the kind of clients that the Mike Salas has, there's a reason why he does it this way.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why he's so successful with those clients.
Exactly.
Not that we're really allowed to name them, but
I
trust me,
think we are.
they're big enough that it matters.
Yeah.
So the other thing, and this is something we did before today's show, is starting early. So you could lump this in with part of the tech rehearsal strategy as well. So you do your tech rehearsal maybe a day or two in advance, but then you also start early on the day. So this show today went live at 2 o'clock Eastern. Marta and I have been here since about 1 o'clock Eastern getting ready. Our producer has been in the background since a little bit before that, double checking, crossing off all the little things on his list to make sure that every angle is covered. Check the equipment, check your bandwidth, check your cameras, check the audio levels, double check that you even have a copy of the script. Make sure that if you're watching chat like Marta is, that's actually open. Those things can be very, very important. And again, if you're bringing in remote participants, just make sure they're there at least half an hour early to iron out any bugs. Mm-hmm. It does mean you're taking up more pieces of people's day, but if you're really serious about the content, you can't sacrifice that.
Exactly. And something else we like to do is we like to have like a confidence monitor. We like to monitor our stream because there's a bit of a delay between when you send the stream out and when it reaches Crowdcast. We have a different way of doing it where we can see immediately what's being pushed out to the screen. So exactly. Having a system of confidence monitoring brings peace of mind to all participants. So that's just something else to think about.
Absolutely. So we've know our space. We've picked our camera to shoot that space. We've selected our audio to get our sound in that space. We've figured out the equipment we're going to use to capture and encode that. We know our bandwidth is good. We've practiced. We're showing up early. We're ready to go live, right?
Yes, absolutely. But there's just a few more things that are really, really important to keep in mind. And these are like hard-won insights that we really want to share with you guys.
Yeah, so this really comes from our own experience of we've been creating a lot of content for a long time, but especially in the past 4 months during these pandemic times, we have been doing a lot of content, not only for ourselves, but assisting other people. And we've learned a lot that even we didn't already know, despite the fact that we've been doing this for a long time.
That's right.
So we wanted to share some of those with you. Mm-hmm. I would say one of the biggest ones that's helped me is having a dedicated producer. This is kind of important. And even if you can have a director and a producer that are different people, this can just help keep everything going, keep everything functioning. Some of you who have watched some of our live shows or webinars in the past have seen Cameron tried to be on-camera talent and a producer at the same time. It's hard. It's really, really hard. It's hard to stay focused and to do everything well by yourself. It's possible. It's definitely possible, but it's clear when someone is doing both, and it's clear that they're distracted from both trying to accomplish them. So if you can have a dedicated producer, like we do today, luckily, then the talent, myself, Marta, we can focus on only producing the content in terms of what we are doing. We're bringing it to you, we're showing our slides, we're giving our talking points, we're staring at the camera. We're not as worried about all the switching titles and all those things that our producer is doing
Yeah,
in the
it's really
background.
nice not to have to worry about that and just be focused on the content. Exactly. So don't try to do everything yourself. If you can find a producer to help you, amazing.
Exactly. And in one experience that I had as a guest on a panel with 5 other people on a live stream, we also had a director, so that in our show up early phase, where everyone showed up early, the director, without having to impact what the producer was doing, was able to tell the people on the panel, this is what's going to happen. You're going to be in this, doing this, you're going to have this, and you're going to have this, and how this is the entire rundown. Meanwhile, the producer was doing the actual technical stuff of making sure everything looked good. So again, if you can, especially when you're dealing with many more people on camera, having a director really helps as well. They can whisper in your ear, they can do all kinds of things, which leads into our next piece, having a back channel of communication.
Yeah, right now we're using Zoom as our back channel communication for both talking. George and I are technically talking over Zoom right now, but we also have like a webinar back channel where our moderator is letting us know that he's putting up new poll questions, that maybe someone has a question that we missed. So because you're live, there's very little control over kind of immediate things that are happening, and having someone there in the back to help you out with that is really, really valuable.
Yeah. And the other thing there, which again, that leads as a great segue into the third point, having a moderator. Marta's watching chat and seeing what you guys are saying and looking at your questions. But because she's also, watching and presenting the content, she can't be 100% on that. You need to have, if you're going to do a show that has live chat, you need to have moderators dedicated to doing just that. Yes, it means another body doing it. Your producer cannot do it. Your director maybe could, but ideally you have dedicated moderators in some cases, depending on how busy your chat is, to watch that chat. One of the risks of live streaming, especially on platforms like YouTube or Facebook, if you have chat enabled, you don't know what's going to happen. The internet is the Wild West when it comes to live streaming chat. And you probably want people to be keeping a close eye, being able to shut down things, ban people, whatever is necessary so that you aren't overrun. And there's a ton of examples very recently in the news where shows had to be shut down or chat had to be disabled in the middle of it because of the toxicity that was happening in chat.
Exactly.
Moderators need to be able to do that, and they need to feel empowered to flex whatever power they do have and use it. No nonsense kind of thing.
And our moderators and back channel producers can also let us know that something is wrong with our stream. Maybe we don't have audio. We've had those situations. Maybe there's like a background noise that needs to be fixed, and we can find out quickly thanks to our moderators.
Exactly. So those are kind of our tips and best practices. So maybe we should look at some questions. I know there's some other polls up there, including asking questions like, do you use hardware encoders or software encoders? Hopefully you've had a chance to weigh in on that poll as well. If you haven't, please do. If you have any questions, put them into the Q&A panel now if you haven't already done so, and we are going to take a look at some of those.
So
because that's usually where things get fun.
Yeah. Here's a question for you, George. Brandon was asking, does Pearl 2 or Pearl Mini have phantom power for those microphones that require 48 volt?
Pearl Mini does, yes. So Pearl Mini the XLR jacks as the audio inputs on Pearl Mini can be either line level or mic level, and they can provide phantom power if you need or not. Pearl 2 is line level only and does not provide phantom power. Typically, it's a large enough system that there's a pre-existing infrastructure for audio like mixers and things like that are going to provide that level of phantom power and mic level signals, and we're just going to get the main line level feed out of it.
Thank you for that. There's your answer, Brandon. So, yeah, we just want to reiterate that we are kind of done with the main content part. It's going to be available as a recording on our website, epiphan.com/webinars, and on our YouTube channel after the show. But right now, we're happy to take your questions. So if you have any questions, throw them into the questions section, upvote the questions that you find interesting. Yeah, let us know what you got.
Yeah. What other questions do we have in there?
So someone really wants to know about Blackmagic pocket cinema cameras. What do we think about that, George?
I've never used one myself, but from what I've seen, they're decent cameras. Definitely nothing wrong with them. They're relatively inexpensive for what they offer, but they are more expensive than honestly some other similar things. The pocket cinemas use a smaller sensor. And there definitely are other cameras that use a very similar size sensor that that are cheaper, that may come with lenses, which the Blackmagics don't. So, I mean, it depends.
I think we found in our live streaming practice that the Zcam E2C is comparable
Yeah,
to the Blackmagic pocket camera. It comes without lenses, but you can attach some really nice Lumix lenses to them
yeah.
and get a really nice effect for just a little bit less.
Yeah, and I would add that the Zcam, the E2, has a network interface on it. You can actually remotely control a lot of the aspects of it in a very generic way. And don't take this as a big knock against Blackmagic. They do make some nice stuff, but Blackmagic's business model is based around selling you a complete ecosystem of all Blackmagic gear. They don't want to play with other stuff. So their control schemes, all these other things, they want you to have all Blackmagic top to bottom. There's nothing wrong with that. Apple does the same thing. That's a particular business choice. But when you look at other pieces out there like the Zcam E2 or other things, you're probably going to find more platform agnostic interfaces to be able to do things like remote control and things along those lines. So that can be an advantage. Yeah, but I mean, I've looked at the Pocket Cinema myself. It's pretty cool. I think there's also, what's the other one? Is it the Micro Cinema? Yeah,
Sure.
it's the Blackmagic Micro Cinema that I actually think is really cool, just because of how small it is. But it's pretty similar.
I'm just answering a question that I think we already covered. What should I consider when choosing a camera for a live stream? So we did cover that in the beginning. And I'm also going to link to our blog article about the 19 best cameras for live streaming that we personally like. And there's also a section in there about how to choose a camera specifically for live streaming. And it talks about things like make sure it has a clean HDMI out, make sure you can connect it to power to have that constant flow of power to it, and make sure it doesn't shut off every 20 minutes. So Jeff, be sure to check out that article.
Yeah, but the quick checklist is live, clean, HDMI or SDI, ideally with audio if you want the option of running that through. That's on optional, and doesn't auto power off on some limited time. What you'll find very quickly is that disqualifies some of the most commonly owned mirrored DSLRs, but probably will be fine with most mirrorless cameras. So at an entry level, and then kind of goes up from there.
Mm-hmm. There's a question about chroma keying, George. We're using chroma keying of an Epiphan Pearl 2, but the border of the person is like pixelated. How can I fix that?
So you need to play with some of the settings for chroma keying. Edge blend and things like that are going to help smooth out the differences between the green screen and the subject. So Pearl 2 has settings for these. Just basically, it's a trial and error playing with it. There's no, because it'll vary depending on what your lighting is, and all kinds of different things. But typically, it's a matter of playing with things like edge blend and things like that to iron out some of those jagged edges.
Mm-hmm. I'm also going to attach a link to this question We have a video on our YouTube channel that addresses how to do chroma keying with Pearl 2. So maybe you could check that out. Maybe that will help you.
Yeah.
Okay, done answering. All right. Can we explain the differences between the roles of a producer versus a director?
Yeah, so I mean, in my interpretation of it, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily define it in the same way that maybe Hollywood does, but generally the producer is going to be in charge of the visual technical, right? The mixing, the switching, the titling, making sure that's all running properly. The director is going to be in charge of the talent in terms of making sure that they're all on the same page. People know, virtually where to stand, where to be, what to be prepared for, what the flow of everything is going to be, and that's kind of it. So for me, it's technical versus talent is kind of the main differentiation.
Kind of like the creative part versus the technical
Exactly.
streaming part.
Yeah.
All right. Question. What upload speed is required for 2 or 3 simultaneous 1080p streams?
Well, basically, if you're sending out 3 simultaneous 1080p streams, let's say Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch all at the same time, which is something we do on our weekly live show. And let's say you're encoding in 5 megabit in for 1080. The math's easy. 5 times 3, you're at 15. Then you apply our other rule of 1.5 or ideally times 2 to come to your minimum upload speed. So you're very quickly finding yourself at close to 30 megabit minimum to do that upload of 3 simultaneous 1080p streams.
Cool. Thank you, George. Any plans for exFAT support for external USB drives on the Pearl Mini when exporting recordings?
Not currently, no. I mean, that still may change in the future, but currently, no. There are some unfortunate limitations about how you can use some of these things. People hold licenses for things and they want you to pay for them, and sometimes they're really expensive. It is what it is. So currently, no, there's no immediate plan to do that, but that could change.
Here's a good one. Which switcher do you recommend using in combination with Epiphan Pearl 2? Well, I think Epiphan Pearl 2 is a great switcher.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. If you are using, within the constraints of the number of inputs that Pearl 2 has, which is 6 in full HD, if you're within that, then you don't necessarily need anything else. But if you're looking at using a switcher in front of it for maybe other things that Pearl doesn't do from a production aspect, honestly, anything you want. Pearl just needs an HDMI or an SDI signal. It doesn't care what it's coming from, really. Myself, I've played with Roland switchers. I've played with some Blackmagic stuff and a few others out there. Between something like Roland and Blackmagic, I prefer the Roland personally. Again, I find it's a little friendlier to work with other ecosystems. And the main thing to look at is if you are going to use a video switcher in front of your encoder, ideally make sure that it's going to output a progressive signal. You don't generally want to be encoding, compressing, and streaming an interlaced signal. It will reduce your image quality. It just doesn't look great. And if you're trying to make the most professional, polished look content you can, you want to be in a progressive workflow all the way through. So again, if you're using interlaced cameras, but you want to eventually be progressive, choosing a switcher that's going to do that conversion for you is also an important thing to consider.
And what I really enjoyed about the Pearl systems is that you can either use a computer or a tablet even for switching. We have something called Epiphan Live, which is the kind of remote production switcher that you can use to switch between different layouts and sources. Or you can also even use the touch screen on the Pearl to switch between those layouts or sources. And it's really quick and easy. If you want
Yeah,
to learn more about the Pearl systems, I will link that in chat as well.
sure.
And yes, uh, done answering. Thank you, George.
Are there any more questions that we
Yes,
have up there?
there's
Anything in
there's
the
I
chat?
think one more question here. Watching from the
Awesome.
Philippines. Hello,
Welcome.
Ted. And how reliable is an NDI connection setup versus an SDI connection setup?
I mean, assuming that your network is very reliable, I would say it's equally reliable or very close to. Um, the biggest thing with NDI is that, of course, it is going over your network. So if your network sucks, then that's your weakest link. So if you're doing full NDI, you probably want a separate dedicated network for only that traffic and not a shared network with all your other network traffic. If you're doing NDI-HX, you could share it a bit, but even then, if you want the most reliability, you probably want it to be separated.
Mm-hmm.
Generally speaking, if you have good quality network switches, you're confident in the wiring in your building, and so on, NDI can be extremely reliable. Is anything going to ever top the straight peer-to-peer, no nonsense stuff of something like SDI? In the worst case scenarios, no, that's going to be unbeatable no matter what. But NDI can get very close if your network is good.
We're actually going to be talking about NDI tomorrow during our live show. We have a very special guest, a company
Yeah.
called Bird Dog. So there's going to be a lot of talk about NDI and SRT. I'm going to link to that in chat right now. So you
Yeah,
guys,
I'm really looking forward to that one.
yeah, it should be great. George, I think you're actually going to be talking
Am
with
I?
Eamon. Yes, you are. And that is going to be live at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific tomorrow, Thursday.
Right.
Let me just pull up
Perfect.
that link. I also wanted to say that we did have one more poll. We put one more poll up. We wanted you guys to let us know what you thought of this webinar, whether it was helpful to you. I know there are some comments in chat that we were talking, like we advertised this as a pro level webinar, and we streaming webinar. We tried to cover as much as we could in terms of pro stuff, but we also wanted to address the more basic things to kind of have that initial level of understanding.
Sure. Yeah. And again, if people had a different expectation, please weigh in on that poll. This is a topic that we may revisit at a higher level. If you're specifically looking at how to do things at a very technical level on something like the Pearl Mini or Pearl 2, we've done webinars about about how to use a Pearl from top to bottom. So you can go back and check at those if that's specifically what you were looking for. Of course, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of variability to this, as we kind of said off the top, especially in things like cameras and audio. It's very difficult to give specifics because there's 1,000 different ways to do one thing, and which is going to be best will depend on a number of other factors. I could tell you the price and availability and which cameras I like here in the Canadian market, but that may not help Ted in the Philippines. So that's why some of that is a little bit vague. Is that we do have an international audience, and so things do vary internationally,
Yeah.
of course.
So please let us know in polls what you thought of this webinar. And I think we have just about one more question, George,
Sure.
that we want to answer, and I think we'll be wrapping this up. What is
Sure.
the latency of switching on the Pearl 2?
So generally, the latency of the switches can be slightly different depending on how you trigger the switches. But generally speaking, you're talking, matters of milliseconds to maybe hundreds of milliseconds at absolute worst. If you're dealing with a Pearl that's severely overloaded, but just struggling through, and you're trying to do switching through something like Epiphan Live, you might see something in the 150, 200 millisecond range, maybe a little higher. But generally speaking, especially if you're doing it on the touchscreen or on the administrator web UI, and your Perl is running extremely efficiently and just humming along, yeah, it's very low.
All right, and I think that's all the questions we have. Thank you guys so much for watching. We're just about ready to wrap up here. If you do have any more questions for us, you can feel free to reach out to us at info@epiphan.com. We'll be glad to help you out. If you have any more questions about Perl systems or our capture cards, don't hesitate to reach out. Yeah, George, what do you think? Any final thoughts here?
No, other than make sure to like, follow, and subscribe and all the socially things on all those different platforms: Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Epiphan Video, and basically all those places. And mostly on YouTube, because not only do these webinars get posted there after the fact, but as we've already mentioned, every Thursday at 3 o'clock Eastern, we do our Live at Epiphan show, a little more condensed than these webinars, but we're usually talking about a wider variety of subjects every week. And as Marta already mentioned, tomorrow we have a special guest from BirdDog, a company that is getting really popular in these days, and they have a heavy focus on NDI PTZ cameras, and so they'll be joining us for a chat about NDI and SRT and all these different things. And so really, if you're interested, especially from a remote production angle, tomorrow's show might be really interesting to you. So join us then and chat with BirdDog. It'll be awesome.
Yeah, totally. All right, George. Well, we want to thank you for watching, and that's it for today.
Yeah, thanks everyone so much. And I do see another question there from Brandon pop up. Brandon, I will answer that in text in Crowdcast in just a moment. So thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you, Marta. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.